What happens when the entire power of the government is focused on one person, but the evidence against them is so flimsy it could fall apart at any moment? Well, we're about to dive into a landmark case where one man stood his ground and the state's case against him was literally a house of cards.
I mean, think about it. This is the central question here. When the very people who run the police, the prosecution, and the courts are the ones pointing the finger at you, it feels like the deck is completely stacked. We're going to see how one incredible case put this whole idea, individual rights versus state power, to the ultimate test. So let's see how it all got started.
All right, let's set the scene. It's 1980. Metro Manila is on edge. There's been a series of bombings and fear is just palpable. Then, right in the middle of all this chaos, a single bomb goes off in a hotel room, and that explosion sets off a chain reaction that's going to drag in one of the country's biggest opposition figures. And things start moving fast. I mean, really fast. A man named Victor Lovely gets hurt by a bomb. Weeks later, police find a picture. And what is it? Just a normal group photo from a birthday party. But also in that photo is Jovito Salonga. And almost overnight, newspapers just erupt. And bam, just like that, based on a single photo, a public figure is now linked to terrorism. So with this media frenzy going on, the state's reaction was, well, it was swift and it was severe. This wasn't just some routine investigation anymore. Oh no, this was the full force of the government coming down on one man. Let's just walk through the pressure campaign here. First, he's arrested, get this, in his hospital bed, and they don't even tell him what the charges are. Then, he's shipped off to a military prison, into a windowless isolation room. Eventually, they let him go home, but only under house arrest, and it takes 4 long months before anyone even officially tells him what crime he's actually being accused of. This is due process getting stretched to its breaking point. Now, to really get the gravity of this, you have to understand who they were targeting. Jovito Salonga wasn't just some politician. He was a survivor. He'd been nearly killed in a bombing years before. We're talking about a man riddled with shrapnel, blind in one eye, almost completely deaf, and with limited use of one of his hands. Knowing this makes his arrest in a hospital and being thrown into isolation, it's just staggering. So the state is coming at him with everything it has. But what did they actually have for evidence? Well, this is where that house of cards really starts to look shaky. Let's start deconstructing the very foundation of the prosecution's case. Okay, before we dig in, there's a quick legal term we need to know: prima facie evidence. All it means is evidence that, on the face of it, is enough to get a conviction if no one argues against it. It's the absolute bare minimum you need to even bring a case to trial. The big question is, did the prosecution even have that? Let's start with their star witness, Victor Lovely, the guy who got hurt in the bombing. In his sworn statement in October, he points the finger right at Salonga, says he set up a key meeting. But then, just a month later, he does a TV interview and the story totally changes. Suddenly, it's a completely different lawyer who whispers the key info. Salonga's role just shrinks. You know, when your main witness can't keep a story straight, your case is already in deep, deep trouble. So when you boil it all down, the entire government case was balancing on just these 2 pillars. That's it. First, the idea that his house was some kind of contact point. And second, that he supposedly made a comment about a violent struggle. That was the whole thing. Now, let's watch the Supreme Court knock them both down. And there you have it. With one sentence, the court completely demolishes that first pillar. They're saying you can't prosecute someone for guilt by association. I mean, if you could, any of us could be in trouble just because of who decides to visit us. The court saw how dangerous that was. So how'd they knock down the second pillar? Well, they pulled out the big guns, one of the most famous defenses of free speech ever. The court argued that just talking about politics, even talking about bad outcomes, isn't a crime. It's called free thought. And the whole point of that freedom is to protect not just the ideas we agree with, but especially the ones we hate. And just like that, the second pillar crumbled into dust. So the prosecution's case is in absolute tatters. Their evidence is a mess, their legal arguments are falling apart. The Supreme Court is getting ready to issue its ruling. And then, the story takes a wild turn. That's right, after years of this whole ordeal, the arrest, the prison, the prosecution, the government itself just gives up. They drop all the charges. Poof, gone. Jovito Salonga is a free man. Case closed, right? Well, not so fast. And this, right here, is probably the most crucial part of the entire story.
The charges are gone, so there's technically no case left to decide. It's what lawyers call moot and academic. Most courts would just say, okay, nothing left for us to do here, and close the file. But for some reason, the Supreme Court decided it still had something to say. The big question is, why?
They decided to rule anyway because they knew their job was bigger than just this one case, this one man. They saw this as a moment to set down principles that would guide and protect people for years and years to come. And here the court just lays it all out. They're saying that protecting a citizen from being unfairly harassed by the state, well, that's way more important than just blindly following some procedural rules. The spirit of the law, protecting liberty, is more important than the letter of the law.
And here's the direct answer to our question. The court says it has a symbolic function. What's that mean? It means its job is to teach, to educate every judge, every lawyer, and every citizen on what our constitutional rights really mean in the real world. This wasn't just for Salonga. It was a lesson for everybody. So in the end, even though the case was technically over, the court put a permanent stamp on the legal record. It declared loud and clear that you cannot build a prosecution on hearsay, shifting stories, and guilt by association. It was a powerful statement that the entire justice system has to be held to a much higher standard. And that really leaves us with this final thought. We often think of courts as a sword, a tool to punish the guilty. But the Salonga case forces us to think about its other, maybe more important role. In a world where the state has so much power, maybe the highest purpose of justice is to act as a shield, to protect the innocent from being crushed by that power.